Milk. It looks innocent enough. It goes in cereal, it goes in coffee, it gets aggressively marketed to children by celebrities with white mustaches. But there's one version of milk that has somehow become a legal, political, cultural, and public health battleground. Raw milk.
And we can't trust a farmer to milk a cow and sell a few gallons to his local neighbor?
People who live on farms have been drinking raw milk since the beginning of time.
You are the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Is there not some moral responsibility or compunction to say, don't drink raw milk?
Here in Germany, you might find it at a farm vending machine, like this one, or sold at a grocery store chain. But back in the United States, the exact same product might be sold in a retail store in one state, completely banned in another, available only through a herd share in another, and available direct to consumer without any bacterial testing in another. Same cow, same milk, completely different regulatory universe. So in today's video, we'll do a deep dive into raw milk. Not literally, of course, but rather to ask, why does Germany treat raw milk like a tightly controlled traditional food, while the United States treats it like a federal state legal puzzle wrapped in a culture war? And by the end of this video, you'll understand better why this really isn't a story about milk. It's a story about trust, risk, government, tradition, and how countries decide what you are allowed to buy. So, let's get started.
How many of us really understand the tremendous job of milk distribution? How many of us truly appreciate the great public service of these friends of ours who protect and deliver the milk to us and our children?
First, a quick definition. Raw milk is simply milk that has not been pasteurized. Pasteurization is the heating process that kills dangerous bacteria and pathogens. It doesn't make milk fake, and it doesn't make it chemical. It's just heat. That's it. Raw milk can come from cows, goats, sheep, or other milk-producing animals. But most of the debate is about raw cow's milk, and that's what I'll be focusing in on today. Now, on one side of the debate, supporters say that raw milk tastes better. It's more natural, supports small farms, and contains beneficial bacteria or enzymes. Although a fair word of warning here, there is a lot of misinformation out there. Raw milk certainly appeals to a particular social media aesthetic, but the nutritional value of pasteurized milk isn't meaningfully different from that of raw milk, as some others would claim without evidence.
The government says it's illegal.
I think you will notice immediately how valuable this food is for humans.
It's normal and healthy. It's way easier for you to digest.
Heating milk to a high temperature for a short period of time, as most pasteurization processes do, yields a minor decrease in some vitamins native to milk. However, these vitamins, like vitamin C, aren't ones that milk is typically considered a good source of anyway. If you want to learn more about this, the FDA has a webpage dedicated to correcting all sorts of rumors about raw milk, like that it's a good source of probiotics. It's not. And that it cures lactose intolerance. It doesn't. Still, people often repeat these misconceptions about the product on TikTok and Instagram. But on the other side of this debate, public health agencies say that the risks are real and don't outweigh the benefits. Raw milk may contain pathogens like Campylobacter, Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, and others, leading to thousands of illnesses each year, hospitalizations, and even death. Furthermore, according to the FDA, and here I mean the actual FDA website, not the Secretary of U.S. Health and Human Services who oversees the FDA, we'll get to him later, the claimed nutritional and health benefits of raw milk are not scientifically substantiated, while the health risks are clear. And although raw milk may be more legally controversial in the United States, survey data suggests that Germans may actually be more likely to consume it. In one German adult survey, 11.5% reported raw milk consumption in just the previous week, compared to 4.4% of US adults who reported drinking it at least once in the previous year. But it is getting more popular in both nations, with market demand for specialized local raw milk, otherwise known as farmstead dairy, continuing to rise despite the fact that conventional milk consumption has stayed stagnant. In the United States, at least at the federal level, the key rule is quite simple. Raw milk intended for direct human consumption cannot be sold or distributed across state lines. The federal regulation is in 21 CFR 1240.61, which requires pasteurization for milk and milk products in final package form intended for direct human consumption when moving in interstate commerce. But here's the twist. The federal government does not create one single national rule for raw milk sold inside of a state. So long as the movement of raw milk stays within state borders, the question really becomes, what does that state allow? And this is where the American system becomes a legal choose-your-own adventure. According to the CDC's raw milk law map that you see here on your screen, states fall into different categories. Some allow retail store sales. Some allow only on-farm sales. Some prohibit sales but allow cow share or herd sharing agreements, and some just prohibit it altogether. That means in one state, you might be able to walk into a store and just buy raw milk on the shelf. But in another, you'd have to drive to the farm, and in another, you don't actually technically buy the milk. You buy a share of the cow, and then you receive milk from your cow, which has to be one of the most American legal inventions imaginable. Your Honor, I did not buy illegal milk. I am merely collecting dividends from my dairy investment portfolio. The frustrating thing for me, though, is that beyond differences in access, there are huge variations in safety checks from one state to another, even in states where it's legal. California, for example, is arguably one of the most stringent, requiring not only licensing of farms, regular animal testing, but also strict bacterial testing of the final product. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have states like North Dakota, where producers are exempt from standard dairy licensing, inspections, or labeling regulations, and they don't even have to test the milk for bacteria or viruses if they're selling direct to consumer.
Milk was a bad choice.
So the American system is not simply raw milk legal, raw milk illegal. It's a patchwork, and that patchwork reflects something very American. Tension between public health regulation, individual freedom, local agriculture, and state-level autonomy. And this tension is perhaps best embodied by the very man in charge of American health and human services. Prior to his post, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. criticized regulatory agencies for their stance on pasteurization, tweeting ahead of the election that the FDA's regulation on raw milk were part of the agency's war on public health. He also asked raw milk entrepreneur Mark McAfee, who co-founded the world's largest organic raw milk dairy in 1999 and has had his own raw milk products recalled, to apply to be an advisor to the FDA on raw milk policy and standards development. But here's where things get interesting. It's one thing to sit on the sidelines and beat the war drum of personal freedom, but it's another thing entirely to be at the helm of a major government agency and have to deal with the double-edged sword that regulation often is. Since taking up his post, RFK Jr. has neither rolled back federal regulations on raw milk, nor has he appointed McAfee. Why? Well, raw milk distribution and sales are governed by the states, and most people in the raw milk industry want to keep it that way. Again, the FDA under the HHS imposes an interstate blockade on raw milk sales, and it has for decades. But this isn't necessarily because the government is protecting consumers. It's actually a protectionist measure put in place by food-related lobbyists to the benefit of state economies and the businesses who operate there, mostly for raw milk intended for pasteurization. The most that the HHS could do is to order the FDA to drop the interstate blockade. This would allow for big farms from California and Pennsylvania to market in areas where smaller farms presently hold a legally constructed territory. Granted, in most places, demand outpaces supply, and this may not directly affect those interstate farms. But online marketing from those farms may displace opportunities for smaller farms to grow. So today, most raw milk advocates actually lean towards maintaining the status quo and protecting the smaller local farms. And I think this reflects a deeper cultural difference. The US often treats food freedom as a state-level and personal liberty issue, but the trade-off is a regulatory landscape that can feel confusing and inconsistent, not all that dissimilar to the patchwork of protections for your online privacy and data as well. That's right, despite guidelines indicating how people's search sites should be used and shouldn't be used, criminals have been known to use the information on these sites to target their victims. One identity thief used the data of 51 individuals, which they acquired from people's search sites, to take out thousands of dollars in fraudulent loans. Unless, of course, you use the invaluable tools from the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes your personal data from multiple sites, including online directories, people's search sites, and even commercial databases. And I don't have to do anything. They do all of the legwork. Plus, if you sign up for their unlimited plan, you have access to their custom removal feature to take down almost everything that is exposed about you online, like your home address, age, and birthday, for example. Incogni is a proven solution for keeping your online identity safe from shady characters, and they are the first and only data removal service to be independently verified by Deloitte. Plus, I can actually use their dashboard to see them working in real time as they continue to work to guard my privacy, which makes me feel so much safer. So if you too want to take back your privacy and personal data, head on over to incogni.com/Ashton or use the code Ashton at the link below in the description of this video to get a big discount, 60% off the annual plan. But as a point of comparison, Germany's system is much more centralized and specific. Under German food hygiene law, the basic rule is that raw milk or raw cream may not be given directly to consumers unless it falls into one of two categories. The first one is for something labeled Forschungsmilch, like you see here, which literally translates to premium milk. And by the way, this is not just some farmer put raw milk in a bottle. Forschungsmilch is a legally defined, specifically controlled raw milk product. It is packaged, sold under specific designations, and subject to strict hygiene and storage requirements. This includes, but is not limited to, special permitting for the farms that meet exceptional hygiene standards, monthly health checks of the entire herd, bacteriological and cytological testing of individual milk samples, and rapid cooling to around 4 degrees Celsius after milking. The German Federal Institute for Risk Assessment, or the BFR, also says that unlike other types of milk, certified raw milk may not be labeled with a best before date, but rather with a use by date, which, by the way, can be no later than 96 hours, 4 days after milking. That's it. And all signs point to these practices having a significant impact on consumer safety. According to the German BFR and the RKI, there are hardly any known cases of illnesses caused by Forschungsmilch. And if you're curious on how these standards compare to the United States, again, California is probably going to be one of the closest US comparisons to Germany's Forschungsmilch because California allows legal retail of raw milk sales, but regulates it more tightly than many US states. As you can see here on your screen, in general, California has a stricter final product bacterial and coliform limits than Germany. In fact, raw milk producers must meet the same bacteria count limits required of pasteurized milk, both at the dairy farm tank and in the final bottle. However, Germany appears stricter on the legal frameworks around approved farms, dedicated herd monitoring, and freshness. It is worth mentioning that there is a flip side to this coin. Because Forschungsmilch is a high-cost raw product that requires special health certifications and has a very short shelf life, it is a highly limited niche market share. At most, it represents a tiny fraction of total consumption, significantly less than 1% of total milk production in Germany. In 2018, in fact, only 1,100 tons of raw milk was sold by just 13 Forschungsmilch farms in Germany, and most of these farmers combine labeling of raw milk with the organic labeling. But there is another option for those seeking out raw milk in Germany: direct from the farm. This is the milk that you might find at a German farm shop or at a raw milk vending machine known as a Milchautomat, like I showed you at the beginning of this video. But there are a few safety measures in place that try to mitigate risk while improving traceability. For starters, the farmer actually must register the sale of farm fresh milk or the installation of a raw milk vending machine with the veterinary office. Today, there are nearly 850 raw milk sale outlets located on farmsteads listed across the country on this national registry. In addition to strict veterinary checks on the animals, regular testing of the milk, strict design and hygiene standards for the production facilities, the National Animal Food Hygiene Regulation also stipulates that the temperature of raw milk should generally be kept below 8 degrees Celsius from filling to delivery. And last but not least, the farmer must also warn consumers with wording like raw milk, boil before consumption. Unfortunately, that last part appears to be a little bit of a hollow warning. In Germany, most foodborne outbreaks with high evidence, meaning high provability, were associated with raw milk consumption in 2018, according to a recent study. As in the previous year, Campylobacter and raw milk were the most frequently reported pathogen and causative food combination. And by the way, just for a quick reference, I am mainly talking about Germany for clarity purposes here, but many other European countries such as France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Italy, Ireland, and parts of the UK also allow for restricted sale of raw cow's milk direct to the consumer from farms as well. Nevertheless, data from Italy has indicated that consumer habits may enhance the risk of infection linked to raw milk consumption. 37% of consumers did not boil the raw milk before consuming, and 93% never used an insulated bag for transport, which further compromises safety. But at the end of the day, the German position appears to be, you're an adult. You may buy this traditional farm product, but we're going to put a giant warning on it. We're going to give you a very short clock and tell you to boil it first, which honestly feels very German.
Whether there's a way to test if this raw milk is fresh enough for people to eat. But if it is, people who live on farms have been drinking raw milk since the beginning of time.
Now, raw milk supporters often point out the fact that millions of people drink this and do not get sick. And that's true. Most glasses of raw milk do not send someone to the hospital. But public health regulation is not based on what happens most of the time. It's based on what happens when the system fails and how severe that failure can be. According to the FDA material citing CDC data, from 1998 through 2018, there were 202 outbreaks linked to drinking raw milk in the United States. Those outbreaks caused 2,645 illnesses and 228 hospitalizations. And by the way, those are just the recognized outbreaks. Those numbers do not include the untold thousands of others who got sick at home with food poisoning and simply chose not to go to a doctor, which happens far more often. In fact, the vast majority of foodborne illnesses are not part of recognized, officially investigated outbreaks. According to the CDC data, while approximately 48 million people in the United States get sick from foodborne illnesses annually, only a small fraction of these cases are linked to specific reported outbreaks, meaning the real number of illnesses are almost certainly magnitudes higher than the outbreak data shows. But if we were just to look at the reported data, a 2022 study looking at unpasteurized milk outbreaks in the United States found that from 2013 to 2018, there were 75 outbreaks and 675 illnesses linked to unpasteurized milk, and 48% of those illnesses were among people aged 0 to 19. And that last part matters because the raw milk debate is often framed as an adult personal freedom issue, but a lot of the people getting sick are children. And children are not the ones reading food safety studies, comparing state regulations, or deciding whether the natural enzymes argument is convincing. They're just eating breakfast. And because E. coli, one of the major foodborne illnesses that can come from raw milk, can spread from one child to another, the risk is not just to the one who drank the raw milk. But given the risks, it also begs the question, so why do people still want to drink raw milk? Well, a lot of people really like it. They like the taste. Raw milk often has a higher fat percentage and a more distinct flavor than pasteurized milk, which of course can appeal to consumers. However, It is worth noting that the flavor difference is largely attributed to not the raw milk's rawness, but to the fact that its cows are often at farms eating grass from one pasture rather than being pooled from cows from many different farms eating many different types of feed. In the United States and Germany, the milk that is consumed en masse is collected by tanker trucks from many different dairy farms and pooled together at a processing plant. So a single gallon of pasteurized milk typically contains milk from hundreds to thousands of different cows. But in contrast, raw milk farms tend to be significantly smaller than conventional industrial dairy operations to facilitate direct-to-consumer sales and herd management. And yeah, sure, different diets create unique flavors in raw milk that some consumers really like. But I really think for a lot of consumers, this is not just about milk. This is about trust. Trust in tradition over corporate processing, trust in personal choice over government warnings, trust in small farms over industrial food. And honestly, guys, there are understandable reasons behind some of that. Industrial food systems have not always earned public trust. People are tired of ultra-processed food. They want local farms to survive. They want food that feels real. And a lot of people are going to places like I did, where you can buy raw milk from a small local farmer that you personally know and trust, someone who has poured generations worth of passion and labors of love into their herd. To supporters, this product represents freedom, tradition, and a connection to the farm, but to regulators, it represents a preventable foodborne illness risk. And both sides often just talk past each other. And I think that's what I personally have come to really appreciate about Germany's system. It's interesting to me because it feels like they kind of try to split the difference. It doesn't completely erase raw milk access, but it also doesn't treat raw milk like normal milk either. The regulators here basically say, yeah, okay, you want the traditional final product? Fine. But it gets special rules, special oversight, special warnings, a short shelf life, and vulnerable people are advised to avoid it. And we'll also offer you a premium option that tries to find a happy middle ground. But don't confuse access with safety. And I think that may be the most important line of the whole video. Access is not the same thing as safety. You know, raw milk is one of those rare foods where a glass of milk becomes a window into national identity. Because raw milk's appearance at the nexus of industrialized agriculture and wellness creates opportunities for kind of an unexpected kinship. Its advocates come from both sides of the political and ideological spectrum and many different parts of society. And whether you think that raw milk is a traditional superfood, a risky gamble, or just the world's most controversial cereal ingredient, the real story is so much bigger than milk. It's about how societies manage risk when people disagree on what freedom should taste like. So now I would love to hear from you. Would you rather have Germany's system, legal but tightly controlled, or the American system, more of a local freedom, but admittedly a bit more confusing? Drop your answer down below in the comments. And if you want more videos comparing everything from regulations to lifestyle differences between the US and Europe, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!